What if your wedding day wasn't the beginning of forever, but the start of being truly seen? A woman abandoned at the altar, a quiet carpenter who offers her shelter, and a little girl who draws her into the family she never thought she deserved. The Bride Left Behind is a story not about grand gestures, but about quiet kindness, second chances, and the love that finds you when you stop looking for perfection. If you believe that healing can come from the simplest things, a warm bowl of soup, a piano played at night, or a name written at the dinner table, then this story is for you. Before we begin, if you'd like to hear more stories that touch the heart and linger in the soul, feel free to subscribe to the channel. It's free, it's easy, and it helps stories like this reach those who might need them most. Now, let me tell you the story of the bride left behind. Not the story of who left, but of who stayed. A struggling single dad took in a bride. Everyone rejected. She asked him to finish the vows. The autumn air clung to the chapel like a silk veil, cool, golden, and impossibly still. Outside, the town of Alder Ridge basked in the gentle hush of early morning. Leaves fluttered in spirals across cobblestone streets. A light breeze stirred the red and amber canopy of trees, and far-off church bells chimed a soft, almost hesitant melody. Inside St. Adelaide's chapel, all was ready. Pew by pew, guests were seated with careful posture and expectant faces. The air smelled faintly of beeswax candles, fresh eucalyptus, and the sweetness of hydrangeas arranged meticulously along the aisle. Every detail had been executed with precision, from the polished silver on the altar to the organist's quiet tuning in the corner. This was meant to be a perfect wedding, and yet something was off. A quiet tension rippled beneath the surface of civility. It started with the absence of chatter, the sideways glances. Guests murmured in tight circles about the bride's missing family, how no one had seen her people arrive, how no reserved seating bore names on her side of the aisle. Then the doors at the back of the chapel creaked open. All eyes turned. Clara stood in the doorway, framed by light. She wore a dress of delicate ivory silk, soft and flowing like water. Tiny pearls dotted the sleeves, and her veil trailed behind her like mist over morning grass. She looked every bit the vision of a bride, except for her eyes. They weren't bright with excitement or wet with joy. They were searching, scanning each row, each face, looking for someone, anyone. No one smiled back. Her shoes clicked softly on the stone floor as she walked the long aisle alone. The absence of footsteps beside her made each of her own ring louder, more pronounced, like echoes in a cavern. Guests whispered as she passed, small comments, flickering judgments, and nervous sympathy. Clara's grip on the bouquet tightened. The white roses trembled slightly in her hands. At the altar, the groom stood motionless. Marcus Rivenhall, polished and poised, wore a navy suit tailored to perfection. His jaw was set, his hands clasped behind his back like a CEO awaiting a board meeting rather than a man welcoming his future wife. He gave no smile, no nod, only a furrow of irritation. When Clara reached the altar and turned to face him, the priest cleared his throat. "We are gathered here today," he began in a gentle voice, "to witness the union of Clara May and Marcus Rivenhall in holy matrimony." A pause, and then, "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" Silence. It was the kind of silence that didn't just fill the room, it pressed down on it. Clara didn't move. The priest's smile faltered slightly, and his eyes scanned the crowd for movement. None came. Marcus raised his brows. "Is this some kind of delay tactic?" he muttered under his breath, only barely audible to Clara. "Where is your father?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "He's not coming." "Then who is?" he snapped. "You told me your family couldn't travel, not that they don't exist." "Ah." Clara's lips parted, but no words followed. Her throat tightened. Heat climbed her neck, not from embarrassment, but from something worse, shame, a familiar weight. Marcus laughed dryly, backing a step away from her. "I see," he said with bitter clarity. "You lied. You didn't want me or anyone to know that you come from nothing." The priest took a nervous step forward. "Perhaps we should—" "No," Marcus cut in. "This is over." Gasps rose from the pews. I'm not marrying someone who can't even bring a name to the altar, he said, loud enough for the guest to hear. I'm not here for charity. I'm here for a future, with someone who knows what that means. He turned and walked away. Just like that. Clara stood frozen. Her bouquet slid from her hands, landing with a soft thud. The petals bruised instantly. She didn't cry. Not yet. The whispers turned into motion. Guests stood, uncertain whether to console her or pretend they'd seen nothing. Most chose the latter. They began to file out, some quickly, others with an apologetic glance. A woman Clara had never met patted her on the shoulder before leaving. A man on Marcus's side shook his head in disappointment, muttering, "Should have seen this coming." Within minutes, the chapel emptied. Clara stood alone beneath the towering crucifix, beneath the stained glass saints who watched silently. Alone. Except for one figure. In the very last pew, a man hadn't moved. He sat with his elbows on his knees, his jacket rumpled, his face unreadable. Beside him, a young girl with curly hair tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, "why is the bride sad?" He leaned down to her ear and murmured something too soft to hear. Then he stood. Clara didn't notice him approaching until he was halfway down the aisle. She was seated now, more like collapsed, on the bottom step of the altar. Her veil had slipped, her dress pooled around her like wilted silk. She didn't look up. The man reached her without ceremony. He hesitated only a second before slipping off his jacket and draping it gently over her shoulders. It smelled faintly of pine wood and autumn air. "You shouldn't be left like this," he said softly. His voice was deep, warm, kind. Clara finally looked up. Her mascara had not run, but her eyes were rimmed red, hollow. She looked at him like he wasn't real. "I didn't know where else to look," she whispered. He nodded once, crouching to meet her at eye level. "Sometimes," he said, "you don't need to know. You just need someone to say, it's okay to not know." Her throat tightened. Her hands were clenched in her lap again. "Can I take you somewhere warm?" he asked, gesturing gently toward the girl now standing behind him. "It's not fancy, but it's safe." Clara stared. Then slowly she nodded. He helped her stand, not offering pity, only presence. "I'm Tom," he said. "This is Emma." The little girl gave a tiny wave. "Hi." Clara gave the smallest nod. "Clara." And so, without a procession, without applause, without promises, Clara walked down the aisle a second time. But this time someone walked beside her. The ride was quiet, not uncomfortable, just still, like the breath between heartbeats. Clara sat in the passenger seat of Tom's pickup truck, her wedding dress gathered awkwardly in her lap. The soft fabric was already creased and stained at the hem, her veil tucked under his jacket still draped across her shoulders. The warmth of it hadn't faded, though the man beside her said almost nothing. Outside the window, the town passed by in slow motion. Amber leaves drifted across the road like the last remnants of something beautiful and fading. Clara stared out, her hands folded in her lap, fingers curling and uncurling in silence. Emma sat in the back seat, legs swinging, nose pressed against the glass. She hummed softly, tracing a finger across the fogging window. Clara found herself watching that small hand, the innocent movement. There was something comforting about it, an echo of a life that had nothing to do with hers. "You okay with soup?" Tom asked gently, eyes still on the road. His voice was low, steady. She blinked. "Soup? That's what we've got at home. Chicken, I think. Could heat it up." She nodded slowly. "Soup is fine." He didn't press. He never did. They turned off the main road and followed a narrower lane framed by sugar maples, branches arching overhead like cathedral beams. At the end of the lane sat a small, wood-framed house tucked between trees, its front porch half buried in fallen leaves. Smoke curled gently from the chimney. A single porch light glowed against the deepening afternoon. Tom parked the truck, cut the engine. Gravel crunched beneath the tires, then everything was still again. "We're here," Emma chirped, already unbuckling her seatbelt. Clara hesitated. She didn't belong here. Not in this little home with its warm windows and familiar clutter. Not in the life of a man who had picked her up from a ruin and offered her shelter like it was the most natural thing in the world. But she had nowhere else to go. Tom walked around and opened her door. He didn't offer his hand, didn't hover. Just waited until she stepped out, one foot at a time, her dress dragging softly along the gravel. Emma bounded up the porch steps. "There's a swing," she called. "And Daddy says it creaks, but I like the sound." Tom smiled. "Watch your step," he said quietly to Clara. "The third board's loose." She followed him inside. The scent of wood smoke and cinnamon wrapped around her the moment she stepped through the door. The house was small but warm, every surface worn in the way things get when they've been cared for rather than replaced. A coat rack held a tiny pink raincoat. A shelf by the door had mismatched shoes and a drawing of what looked like a smiling moose. Signed, Emma, age 6. Clara's chest tightened. "This way," Tom said, leading her down a narrow hallway. He opened the door to a guest room, modest, with pale walls and a single bed neatly made under a patchwork quilt. "It's not much," he added, rubbing the back of his neck, "but it's quiet and warm." Clara stepped inside, her heels making soft clicks on the hardwood floor. The window looked out onto a small backyard lined with trees. A bird feeder swayed gently outside. There was no sound of traffic, no marble tiles, no hotel staff knocking. Just peace. "Thank you," she said, turning to him, "for bringing me here, for not asking." Tom met her eyes, serious. "I figure if you wanted to explain, you would have." She gave him a look then, a mixture of caution and gratitude. No one had ever said that to her before. That silence could be respected. "I'll let you rest," he said. "Dinner in 20 minutes or so." He closed the door softly behind him. Clara sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't cry. She hadn't since the church. Her body felt too hollow for tears. She slipped off her shoes, slowly peeled back the veil, unfastened the dress at her shoulder. She wrapped herself tighter in Tom's jacket. Its scent was grounding. Pine, wood shavings, the faintest trace of laundry detergent. She lay back, staring at the ceiling. The silence here wasn't empty. It was full of breath, of subtle sounds. Emma's voice somewhere down the hall, a drawer opening, the tap of a spoon against a pot. Dinner came sooner than she expected. The kitchen was small and warmly lit. Clara sat at the end of the table, while Tom ladled soup into chipped ceramic bowls. Emma set the table with care, placing napkins crookedly, but with pride. The soup smelled like home, simple, hearty, made with care. They ate in quiet. Tom didn't push conversation. He spoke to Emma mostly, asking about school, about a picture she was drawing. Emma asked if soup could be a color. "I think it's golden," she decided, and giggled when Clara smiled at the thought. "Daddy makes soup when someone has a sad day," Emma added matter-of-factly, reaching for a piece of bread. "Is today your sad day?" Clara froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth. Tom opened his mouth, ready to step in, but Clara held up a hand gently. She looked at the little girl. "Yes," she said softly. "I think today is my sad day." Emma beamed. "Then you get the extra piece of cornbread." Tom chuckled. "House rules." Clara laughed, a real surprised laugh that caught in her throat and turned into something fragile. She pressed a hand to her chest as if to hold the moment in place. After dinner, Emma showed Clara the bookshelf in the living room. Most of the titles were old, dog-eared, beloved. Tom disappeared for a few minutes and returned with a folded robe and a pair of thick socks. "They're probably huge on you," he said, "but warm's warm." She took them in silence. Before bed, Emma tugged at Clara's sleeve. "Can I hug you?" Clara hesitated, then knelt down. The child wrapped her arms around her without hesitation. "You can stay," Emma whispered. "We have room." Clara's eyes stung, not with grief, but something else, something tender. "Thank you," she murmured into the girl's hair. That night, Clara lay beneath the patchwork quilt in borrowed clothes, her fingers curled around the hem of the blanket. The house was still. Outside, wind brushed against the window panes, and a swing creaked on the porch. She stared at the ceiling, jacket still tucked around her, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself feel tired. Not defeated, just tired, and safe enough to sleep. Clara awoke to birdsong. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The ceiling above her was unfamiliar, painted a soft cream, cracked slightly in one corner. Her body sank into a mattress firmer than she was used to, the weight of a patchwork quilt pressing gently over her legs. Her mind, still groggy from the weight of yesterday, lingered between dreaming and waking. Then she heard the sound of laughter down the hall, a child's laugh, light and unfiltered. Emma. She closed her eyes again. The events of the previous day returned in pieces. The chapel, the silence, the absence of footsteps beside her, the bouquet slipping from her fingers, the empty altar, and then Tom, his coat on her shoulders, the way he never asked her why, and this house, this little haven tucked at the edge of the world. She sat up slowly, the quilt slipping off her shoulders. Tom's jacket had fallen beside the bed. She reached for it and held it for a moment, the fabric slightly crumpled but still warm with memory. When she stepped into the kitchen, the smell of toast and scrambled eggs greeted her. Emma was already seated at the table, kicking her feet rhythmically beneath the chair. She looked up and beamed. "Morning!" Clara smiled faintly. "Morning!" Tom glanced up from the stove, spatula in hand. "Hope you slept all right." She nodded. "More than I expected to." "Hi." He slid eggs onto a plate and set it in front of her without ceremony, pouring her a cup of tea from the kettle. "We're a little low on options, but it's hot. And real." Clara looked down at the food, unsure when she'd last had a hot breakfast made by someone else. Everything in her life had been room service or rush bites between meetings. She murmured a soft thanks, then took a bite. The eggs were fluffy, lightly peppered, the tea strong and earthy. Emma watched her with open curiosity. "Your dress was so pretty," she said suddenly, "but you're even prettier without it." Clara nearly choked on her tea. She coughed, blushing. Tom gave Emma a quiet look. "What?" Emma said, unbothered. "She is." Clara laughed softly. It caught her by surprise. "Thank you." After breakfast, she helped clear the plates without being asked. Her movements were careful, tentative, as if afraid she might overstep some invisible line. But Tom said nothing, only gave her a quiet nod of appreciation when she handed him a dish towel. Later that morning, while Tom fixed a loose cupboard hinge in the kitchen, Clara wandered out onto the porch. The swing Emma had mentioned was there, slightly tilted, a fraying pillow tied to one side. She sat down, feeling it creak gently beneath her weight. The sun had started to filter through the trees, casting dappled light across the porch floor. She didn't realize how long she'd been sitting until she heard footsteps behind her. Emma appeared, holding a stack of colored pencils and a sheet of paper. "I made something," she said shyly. "Want to see?" Clara turned. "Of course." Emma handed her the paper. It was a drawing, crayon-colored, joyful, and unmistakably childish. But what struck Clara wasn't the technique, it was the subject. A small house under a tree with red leaves. 3 figures stood hand in hand on the porch steps. A tall man with messy hair, a little girl with curls, and a woman with long hair in a triangle dress. Above them, in uneven block letters, Emma had written, "My family." Clara stared at it. She tried to speak, but the lump in her throat stopped the words. Emma tilted her head. "Is it okay?" Clara nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "It's beautiful." The little girl beamed, clearly proud. "I didn't show Daddy yet," Emma said, "'cause sometimes he gets quiet when I say stuff like that. But I don't think it's wrong." Clara folded the picture carefully, as if it were something sacred. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held it against her chest. "Do you know," she said softly, "I don't think it's wrong either." A long moment passed. Then Emma, without warning, climbed onto the swing beside her and leaned her head on Clara's shoulder. They sat like that for a while, 2 figures framed in golden light, the swing creaking, the world quiet except for the breeze in the trees. Tom noticed the drawing that evening. He found it on the coffee table, folded neatly beside a cup of chamomile tea Clara had made for herself. He didn't open it at first. He recognized Emma's scribbles immediately. She drew a lot. Stories, animals, things that didn't make sense to anyone but her. But something about this one felt different. He sat down, opened it, and stared. He didn't say anything, just let the silence wrap around him. He could hear Clara in the kitchen, humming faintly as she dried the dishes. Emma was upstairs getting ready for bed. Tom folded the drawing again and slipped it into the book on the table. Leaves of grass, worn and dog-eared. He didn't know why, only that it felt like something worth keeping safe. That night, as Clara tucked Emma in, the little girl asked, "Do you have a family?" Clara paused, then sat down on the edge of the bed. I used to, she said carefully. In a way. Emma nodded solemnly, as if she understood more than her age allowed. Sometimes I pretend Mommy is just away on a long trip. Clara reached out and gently brushed a curl from Emma's forehead. And how does that feel? Okay, Emma said, but I like now better. Clara swallowed. After Emma fell asleep, she returned to the living room. Tom was seated on the porch steps, watching the moon through the trees. She joined him without a word. After a long silence, he spoke. You don't have to stay. I know this isn't what you planned. She looked at him. Planned? He gave a wry smile. I figure no one wakes up and says, I hope my wedding ends in a stranger's pickup truck. Clara laughed softly. No, definitely not. He glanced at her, then away. But you're welcome here, as long as you need. She nodded, feeling something shift in her chest. Something slow and quiet and real. I think, she said gently, I've never been in a place that asked nothing of me. Tom didn't respond, but his expression softened. The swing behind them creaked in the wind. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Clara didn't feel like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. There was no performance here, no test to pass. Just the cool night air, the warmth of borrowed clothes, and the sound of someone breathing beside her without expectation. Clara stood barefoot in the kitchen, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a dish towel slung over her shoulder. Morning light streamed in through the small window above the sink, warm and golden, casting her in hues of soft amber. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and bread, the kind of scent that spoke more of memory than recipe. She was drying a plate, slowly, with careful, deliberate movements. Not because the task was difficult, but because it was grounding. There was something oddly sacred in the rhythm of it. Wash, rinse, dry, stack. Her body moved without thought, but her heart was starting to thaw. Behind her, Emma was sitting cross-legged on the floor, sorting buttons into jars by color. She narrated her process with the seriousness of a scientist conducting an important experiment. Blue ones are for rainy days, she explained. Green ones are for wishes. Red ones go in the angry jar. But I don't use that one unless someone breaks my crayons. Clara smiled, placing the plate neatly into the drying rack. And the yellow ones? Happy, obviously. Tom entered the kitchen just then, rubbing sleep from his eyes, hair still tousled. His flannel shirt was only half buttoned, and his feet made soft sounds on the worn hardwood floor. Smells like someone's been busy, he said, noticing the clean counter, the tidied sink. Clara turned, drying her hands. I thought it might be nice to help a little. He looked around, then back at her. You didn't have to. I know, she said softly, but I wanted to. Tom opened a cupboard, pulled down a mug. He didn't say anything right away, just poured himself coffee, added a little milk, stirred slowly. I've never had anyone clean the kitchen without me asking, he finally murmured, almost more to himself than to her. Clara shrugged. I guess I've never stayed long enough anywhere to do it. They stood in quiet for a moment, letting the warmth of the room speak where words weren't needed. Then Emma, proudly holding up a jar of blue buttons, interrupted the hush with a triumphant, Rainy days complete. Tom laughed. You've got yourself a whole weather system there. Emma grinned and looked at Clara. Can she stay for lunch again, Daddy? Clara glanced at Tom, then quickly down at her hands. Tom hesitated, then nodded. If she wants to. I'd like that, Clara said, and she meant it. Lunch was grilled cheese and tomato soup, the kind you dipped with your hands and didn't bother to pretend was fancy. They ate on the back porch, plates balanced on their laps, legs stretched toward the railing. Emma talked through most of it, about a squirrel she'd seen on the fence that morning, about a book at school with a dragon named Kevin, and about how grown-ups always make things too serious. Tom listened, nodding, his eyes occasionally drifting toward Clara. He watched the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when the wind blew it forward, the way she laughed gently but with her whole face, as if she wasn't used to doing it often, but remembered how when she did. At one point, Clara caught his gaze and smiled. Something passed between them then. Nothing grand or sudden, but something honest. A flicker of recognition, of understanding. After lunch, Emma went inside to draw, and Tom started repairing a loose porch railing. Clara hovered near him, unsure whether to offer help or simply not get in the way. "You ever used a hammer?" he asked, not looking up. She blinked. "A hammer?" He held one up. "Heavy thing, hits nails." She laughed. "I've seen them. Never used one." He handed it to her. "First time for everything." She took it carefully, feeling the weight in her hand. Tom held a nail in place, looked at her. "Want to try?" She hesitated, then nodded. Kneeling beside him, she aimed, tapped, then hammered. It was awkward at first, her grip unsteady, the angle wrong, but Tom guided her gently, his hand just hovering above hers, offering small corrections without criticism. When the nail finally slid in smooth and straight, Clara looked up, triumphant. "I did it." "You did." And then, without warning, she laughed again. It was louder this time, freer. Tom leaned back on his heels, looking at her not like a guest or a stranger, but like someone familiar. That evening, they sat down for dinner, chilly this time, thick and spicy. Clara helped Emma set the table. She didn't ask where things went anymore. She just knew. When the food was served, Tom paused, looking around the table. He cleared his throat. "We usually say something before we eat." Clara raised her eyebrows, surprised. "Not a prayer exactly," he explained. "More like a moment." Emma folded her hands. "Can I say it?" Tom nodded. Emma squeezed her eyes shut. "Thank you for the food and for good weather, and for Miss Clara who makes the house smell nice now, and for Daddy not being grumpy today. Amen." Tom coughed into his napkin, hiding a smile. Clara chuckled, her face warming. "Do I really make the house smell nice?" Emma nodded emphatically. "Like soap and flowers and something soft." Dinner tasted different that night, not because of the chili, but because of the company. The rhythm of their conversation flowed more easily, like a song that had finally found its melody. Afterward, as Clara gathered the dishes, she noticed something on the table. A small square of folded paper, her place card. It was hand-drawn, with her name written in shaky block letters. A flower doodled beside it. She picked it up, staring at the name. Clara. Just that. No last name. No title. A name at the table. She looked toward Emma, who was busy stacking spoons, and then toward Tom, who met her eyes with a quiet, unreadable expression. "You didn't have to do this," Clara whispered. "I know," Tom said, "but you're here, and you matter." Clara looked down at the card again, her fingers brushing the soft paper. Something in her chest ached, not painfully but deeply, like the slow stretch of a muscle long unused. Later that night, while Emma slept and the house had grown still, Clara wandered onto the porch again. Tom was there, as he always seemed to be in the quiet hours, leaning against the railing, a mug of tea in hand. He didn't speak when she approached, just moved slightly to make space. She stood beside him, arms crossed against the chill. "The stars are bright tonight," she said softly. He nodded. "Happens out here when the world isn't busy drowning them out." They stood in silence for a long time. Then, almost without thinking, Clara asked, "Do you ever miss it?" Tom turned to her. "Miss what?" "The noise, the chaos, people, deadlines, meetings, purpose." He thought for a moment, then answered slowly. "I used to, before Emma. Before the quiet started feeling like something I earned, not something I ran to." Clara nodded, absorbing his words. "Do you?" he asked in return. She looked out at the trees. "I'm not sure. I think I'm just now learning what peace feels like." Tom didn't push her, just took a sip of his tea, eyes on the stars. And for a little while, they didn't need to say anything more. Clara hadn't intended to rearrange the spice rack, or fold the dish towels by color, or sweep the porch while Emma napped. But somehow, as the days blurred gently into one another, her hands had found their own rhythm, tidying, fixing, softening edges that had long gone unnoticed. She told herself it was just to help, just to earn her keep. But she knew deep down it was more than that. She was beginning to care. It wasn't about cleanliness. It was about making a place hers, even just a little. A corner of a shelf where her borrowed mug sat each morning, a scarf draped over the coat hook like it had always been there, a tea tin, her favorite blend, placed between Tom's coffee and Emma's cocoa, as if it belonged. One evening, as twilight cast long shadows across the kitchen floor, Clara stood by the window drying a plate. Outside, the sky blushed with streaks of apricot and plum, the kind of sunset that made you believe in softness. Tom was in the backyard chopping firewood. His flannel sleeves were rolled high on his forearms, and the rhythmic thud of the axe landing in the log punctuated the evening stillness. Every now and then, he paused to rub his shoulder. Clara noticed he always did that when it was going to rain. Inside, the quiet settled around her like a well-worn blanket, until she heard it, a faint, out-of-tune note, then another. She turned slowly toward the living room. Emma sat on the floor beside an old upright piano, her small fingers pressing keys at random. The wood was scuffed, the ivory chipped on some of the keys, but even in its wear, the piano held a kind of quiet dignity, like it had known lullabies and heartbreak in equal measure. "I didn't know you had a piano," Clara said, stepping in. Emma turned. "It used to be Grandma's. Daddy doesn't play, though. He just fixes the bench when it wobbles." Clara smiled, kneeling beside her. "Do you play?" Emma shook her head. "I tried, but it sounds weird." Clara pressed a key, wincing at the sharp, flat note. "It needs tuning." Emma tilted her head. "Can you fix it?" Clara hesitated. "I can try." That night, after Emma had gone to bed and Tom was reading quietly on the porch, Clara returned to the piano. She sat down slowly, running her fingers lightly across the keys. Some were sticky, a few were hopelessly flat, but the bones were good. The weight of it beneath her hands felt familiar. She hadn't played since she was a teenager, since the days when music had been her one place of refuge, long before expectations took its place, long before she'd traded sound for silence, feeling for control. She pressed a few keys, gently this time, adjusting the pressure, coaxing sound from the instrument instead of commanding it. Tom's voice came from behind her, soft. "Didn't know you played." She didn't turn. "I used to." "How long ago?" "A lifetime." Tom stepped inside, setting his book on the arm of the couch. He didn't speak again, just sat, listening. Clara closed her eyes, took a breath, and began to play. The notes weren't perfect. Some keys stuck. Others came out warped or soft, but the melody still found its way through. The bones of an old lullaby, simple and slow. It was a song her mother used to hum while folding laundry, a tune Clara hadn't even known she remembered until her fingers found it again. Tom leaned back, arms crossed loosely over his chest. When the last note faded, neither of them spoke. Clara looked down at her hands. "I used to think," she whispered, "that if I played something beautiful enough, someone would stay." Tom didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I think sometimes it's not about the music, it's about who listens when it's quiet." She turned slowly. Their eyes met. His gaze wasn't full of questions or sympathy, just presence. "Did she play?" Clara asked. Tom nodded. "My mother, all the time. Same piano. She must have loved it." "She did," he said. "But she played for other people. Churches. Events. Always a full room. I think she forgot to play for herself." Clara looked at the keys again. "That's easy to do." He studied her for a moment longer. "You should keep playing." She gave a quiet laugh. "Even with half the keys off pitch?" "I didn't notice," he said. She smiled, really smiled, and looked away before he could see how much it meant. In the days that followed, Clara continued to play. Quietly at first. A few minutes in the late afternoon, a chord or two before bed. She taught Emma how to find middle C, how to play a simple scale. The child's joy was contagious. Every wrong note met with laughter. Every small success celebrated with a dramatic bow. Tom listened, sometimes from the porch, sometimes from the kitchen, always just within earshot. And slowly, something began to shift. Not all at once. It started in the small things. The way Clara reached for a second plate without asking whose turn it was to serve. The way Tom poured her tea without needing to ask how she liked it. The way Emma crawled into Clara's lap on the couch with a book and didn't look up for permission. Belonging doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It creeps in through shared silences, through dinners without pretense, through soft music on tired nights. One evening, Clara opened the old bench under the piano and found a folder of yellowed sheet music. Most were too faded to read, but one stood out. Autumn Nocturne, handwritten, dated in the corner. 1984, in careful cursive, to Mom. Play this when you miss yourself. She ran her fingers over the ink. Later that night, after the house had gone still, Clara played it. And for once, she didn't play for anyone else. Not to be heard, not to impress, not to hold someone in place. She played because she needed to remember who she was. And from the porch, Tom listened. Not as a man offering shelter, but as someone quietly realizing he didn't want the music to end. The first frost of the season arrived quietly, brushing the edges of the porch railings with a silver sheen and crisping the last of the leaves clinging stubbornly to the maples. When Clara opened the front door that morning, the air bit at her cheeks, sharp and bracing, and yet somehow invigorating. She breathed it in, let it fill her lungs. It was the kind of morning that made you feel alive, even if you weren't sure what that meant anymore. Inside, the house was still wrapped in sleep. The kettle had yet to hiss. Emma hadn't yet tumbled down the stairs in her mismatched socks, and Tom's boots remained by the door, undisturbed. Clara stood for a while in that quiet. She didn't know why exactly, but something inside her had begun to shift. The kind of shift that didn't shout, didn't burst through the surface. It whispered. It asked questions instead of giving answers. It tugged at the corners of silence. Later, after breakfast, while Emma was at school and Tom was out on a repair job, Clara sat alone at the piano. She didn't play. She simply sat, fingers resting gently on the keys, heart somewhere between hesitation and something softer. On the far shelf, half buried under a stack of unused notepads, she found the thing she hadn't intended to find. A folded piece of paper. No, the piece of paper. The vow. The one she had written months ago. Long before the dress, the flowers, the chapel. She had folded it carefully and kept it hidden in her clutch that day. Not because she feared she would forget the words, but because she had hoped they might mean something more if she held them close until the right moment. She had never gotten to read them. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded the page. The ink had smudged in one corner, probably from the tears she hadn't let fall. She read the words again, slowly. I don't promise perfection. I won't always know the right thing to say or how to fix what hurts, but I promise to try. I promise to be honest. I promise to choose you again and again, not because life is easy, but because love is worth returning to. I will hold your hand when you're strong and when you're not. I will be home when the world is not kind. Clara folded the page once more and held it to her chest. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Clara found Tom in the garage. The space smelled of sawdust and cold metal, comforting in a way she couldn't quite name. Tom was bent over a workbench, sanding the edge of a small wooden box. Simple, handcrafted, no embellishment. I didn't mean to interrupt, she said softly. He looked up, brushing dust from his hands. You're not. Clara stepped closer, holding something behind her back. What's that? He asked, noticing. She hesitated, then extended the folded page toward him. I wrote this, she said, for my wedding day, my vows. But I never got to say them. Tom took the page gently, his eyes scanning her face before looking down at the words. Clara turned away, pacing the small garage with slow, uncertain steps. I don't know why I'm giving this to you, she murmured. I've been carrying it so long, not just in my bag, in me, and lately it feels heavier somehow. Like if I don't speak it even once, it'll disappear. Like it was never real. Tom read silently. She kept speaking, not because he needed her to, but because she needed to hear herself. I spent so much time planning the perfect day. The dress, the guests, the music. But none of that mattered. What mattered were these words. I wrote them because I believed in love that showed up. In someone who stays. Her voice caught slightly. And then no one did. A long silence passed. Tom looked up. These are beautiful, he said quietly. Every word. Clara nodded, blinking fast. I thought maybe you could help me finish them. Just once. Just so they don't stay unfinished. He folded the page slowly, deliberately. "I can do that," he said. They stood together in the living room. No candles, no music, no audience. Just the hum of the heater, the creak of the old floorboards, and the faint sound of wind brushing against the windows. Tom handed the page back to her. "You want to read it?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "No, I want to hear it. I want to know what it sounds like when someone stays." So he read it, not like a groom, not like a stranger. He read it like someone who knew what it meant to rebuild, word by word, piece by piece. When he finished, neither of them spoke. Clara wiped her eyes, smiling through the tears. "It's strange," she said. "I thought saying it would make me sad, but it didn't." "What did it make you feel?" "Seen," she whispered. "Like maybe I'm still allowed to believe in love." Tom reached out, not with urgency but with quiet care, and touched her hand. She let him. It was the first time she had let someone touch her without flinching since that day. Maybe even before it. And the strange thing was, it didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like a continuation of something gentle, something real. Not fireworks, but a flame that wouldn't go out. Later, in the stillness of her room, Clara lay awake, the folded vow on her nightstand. The words no longer felt unfinished. She didn't know what came next, but for the first time in a long while, she knew she wasn't carrying it alone. The morning began like any other. A pale sun was climbing through the trees, sending soft, streaked light across the windowsill. The scent of brewing coffee drifted through the house, and the floor creaked faintly under Emma's dancing footsteps upstairs. Outside, frost still clung to the grass like a secret not yet told. Tom stood at the kitchen counter, spreading jam on toast with the kind of quiet focus that comes from routine. He reached for the second plate, the one he'd begun setting out instinctively each morning since Clara had arrived. But the hallway was silent. No gentle footsteps, no voice humming under her breath, no sound of her settling onto the porch swing with her tea. He waited another few minutes listening. Still nothing. He knocked on her door gently. "Clara?" No answer. He pushed the door open a crack. The bed was made. The quilt folded with deliberate care. The pillow fluffed. Her jacket, the one he'd lent her that first day, was draped across the end of the bed. Folded. On the nightstand sat a note. Tom stared at it, unmoving. Then he stepped forward and picked it up. The handwriting was small and steady. "Tom, thank you for everything, for the kindness you never owed me, for the space to breathe, and for helping me hear my own voice again. I'm not running. I just have something I need to face before I can truly stay anywhere. Tell Emma I adore her and that her drawing is still folded in my pocket. I hope this isn't goodbye. But if it is, thank you for making me feel like I had a home, even if just for a while. Clara." Tom stared at the words until the letters blurred. He sat on the porch steps, elbows on his knees, the note still in his hand. He didn't know how long he'd been there when Emma padded out beside him in her socked feet. "She's gone?" the little girl asked. He nodded slowly. Emma sat down beside him. "Is she coming back?" "I don't know," he admitted. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "People always say goodbye when I like them." Tom closed his eyes. It wasn't anger he felt. It wasn't even disappointment. It was something older, more familiar. The ache of someone gently removing themselves from your life. So gently you almost didn't realize you'd been left. Until they were already gone. And this time, it wasn't just Emma's sadness he had to carry. It was his own. The rest of the day passed in pieces. Tom kept busy. He fixed the back fence, though it didn't need fixing. He rearranged the tools in the garage, wiped down the counters twice, cleaned out the gutter before the first snow. He told himself it was just another day, but everything felt quieter. Too quiet. When he opened the cupboard to grab a mug, her tea tin was gone. When he turned on the radio, the piano keys felt lonelier somehow. He found the place card Emma had made for her, Clara in wobbly block letters, and set it gently in the drawer, as if placing it in a storage would make it hurt less. That night, Emma asked, "Did she leave because of me?" Tom looked at her sharply. "No, never. She cared about you, Em. A lot." "Then why didn't she say goodbye?" Tom knelt beside her, brushing a curl behind her ear. Sometimes grown-ups don't say goodbye because they're afraid if they do, they won't be able to leave at all. Emma looked at him for a long time, then whispered, "You're sad." He didn't deny it. "Yeah. Do you miss her?" He nodded. "I do." Emma leaned forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Then maybe this time, we can wait. Just a little. Maybe she's coming back." Tom held her tightly, heart twisting in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't just that Clara had gone. It was that he'd let her in, and somewhere along the way, she had quietly taken root in the spaces he didn't even know were still empty. The next morning he found something odd. A small wooden box, unfinished, its lid slightly ajar, resting on his workbench in the garage. It hadn't been there before. He was sure of it. Inside was a folded piece of cloth, soft linen, off-white, frayed at the edges. Clara's vow, written in her own hand, embroidered onto the fabric. The same words he had read aloud in the living room. The same lines she had whispered as her voice cracked with memory. At the bottom she had added one more line. "I'm not lost. I'm just not home yet." Tom stood there for a long time, the box cradled in his hands, unsure if his heart was breaking or mending. That night he sat at the piano. He hadn't played in years, but he pressed a single note, then another. It didn't sound like her. It didn't sound like his mother. It sounded like something beginning. And for the first time since the morning Clara left, Tom let himself whisper what he hadn't dared say aloud, not even to himself. "Come back to us." It had been 6 days since Clara left. 6 quiet mornings of setting 2 plates instead of 3, only to push the second aside. 6 evenings of Emma asking, "Do you think she's okay?" with a hopeful lilt that faded a little more each time. Tom had stopped checking the road. He told himself not to hold on to maybes. He lived long enough to know that some people leave, and they don't come back. Not because they don't care, but because life tugs them in directions you can't follow. Still, a part of him waited, silently, in the way you leave a porch light on, just in case. It was on the 7th morning, crisp and bright, frost glittering like sugar on the grass, when the knock came. Not the kind of knock from a neighbor, not a tap, not a hesitant gesture. It was decisive. Tom opened the door, expecting a delivery man or someone lost asking for directions. Instead, a man in a tailored black coat and leather gloves stood on the porch, holding a small envelope of ivory cardstock. "Tom Carter?" the man asked with practiced professionalism. Tom nodded. "I have a delivery for you from Miss Clara Margaret Ellington." He blinked. "Sorry, who?" The man smiled faintly. "Miss Ellington asked that I not answer questions. Only that I deliver this by hand." He extended the envelope, turned and left before Tom could ask anything else. Tom stood there for a long moment, the envelope heavy in his hand. Far heavier than a slip of paper should have been. He turned it over. No address, no seal. Just his name, written in Clara's handwriting. Familiar now. He'd seen it on the linen vow, on grocery lists, on the little note she'd left behind. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single card, minimal, elegant, deep cream, with gold lettering pressed into its surface. "You are cordially invited to a wedding. No altar, no church pews, no one left behind. Time, Saturday just before sunset. Place, the meadow behind the maple grove. Dress code, whatever makes you feel like yourself. Signed, Clara Margaret Ellington." Tom sat down hard on the porch step, staring at the card. Margaret Ellington. It rang a bell somewhere in the corners of his memory. Half-heard headlines, magazine spreads, names that never meant much to him. It sounded like wealth, like legacy. It didn't sound like the woman who'd planted tulip bulbs beside his daughter, or the woman who'd cried softly as he read her vow aloud in a quiet living room. But maybe that was the point. He turned the card over. On the back, in Clara's own handwriting, she'd added a single line. "This time, I want you to hear the words before you decide whether to stay." That evening, Tom sat on the edge of his bed, the invitation resting on his knees. Emma had already gone to bed, clutching the stuffed rabbit Clara had sewn a button onto. He thought about asking someone who Clara really was. He knew how to find answers. A quick search. A few clicks. Probably articles, photos, family trees. But he didn't, because none of that mattered. He didn't need to know her name in full to know the way she looked when Emma had handed her the family drawing, or the way she'd tucked her legs under her on the porch swing, trying not to take up space, or the way she'd played the piano, hesitantly, reverently, as though every note was a small apology for forgetting herself. He didn't need to know her legacy. He had known her. And now maybe, just maybe, she wanted him to see all of her. The next morning he packed a bag, just a small one. He stood in the living room holding the invitation again, the morning light washing over the room that still held pieces of her. The tea tin Emma had insisted they keep, the scarf still hanging by the door, the drawing she'd never taken down from the fridge. Emma tiptoed down the stairs in her pajamas. "Where are we going?" Tom knelt beside her. "We've been invited somewhere." Emma's eyes lit up. "Is it a party?" He smiled. "Something like that." They arrived just before sunset. The meadow stretched wide behind the grove of maples, the grass a soft gold beneath the falling light. The trees framed the clearing like old friends standing guard. There were no rows of chairs, no music, no archway of roses or aisle runner. Just Clara. She stood beneath a single maple tree in a simple white dress, not the extravagant gown from that day in the chapel. This one was soft, flowing, like something borrowed from the wind. Emma saw her first. She darted forward, shouting, "Clara!" with the kind of joy only children can muster without fear. Clara crouched just in time to catch her. "You came," she whispered, holding the child tight. "You both came." Tom approached more slowly. He stopped a few feet away, his voice rough but steady. "Margaret Ellington, huh?" Clara stood, brushing a curl from Emma's cheek. "You Googled me." "No," he said. "I read the back of a wedding invitation." She stepped closer. "I didn't lie to you, Tom," she said gently. "I just needed to find out who I was without it, without the weight, without the rooms that echoed when I spoke." "And did you?" She nodded. "In your home, with your daughter, in the quiet, in the piano notes that sounded like breath. I remembered who I was before I was anything." Emma tugged on Clara's hand. "Are you getting married right now?" Clara laughed softly. "That depends. I wrote a new vow, but I was hoping someone else would go first this time." She looked at Tom. He looked at her, really looked. No suit, no script, just her, in the dying light, asking nothing more than his heart. "I don't have anything fancy to say," he said. "No flowers, no poems." She waited. "But if you'll have me," he continued, "I can offer a home, a place to come back to whenever you need to remember who you are." A long pause, then Clara whispered, "I do." And this time, the words didn't echo off empty pews. They settled softly into the grass, the sky, the hands they now held. Emma clapped. "Finally!" She turned and shouted toward the trees. "She didn't leave us!" That night, as the stars bloomed above the meadow, the three of them sat beneath the maple tree, wrapped in a quilt, sharing hot cider and laughter. There had been no priest, no photographer, no ring bearer, but there had been witnesses: the wind, the leaves, the silence that no longer felt lonely, and a single vow that was finally spoken and received. The house hadn't changed much. The swing on the porch still creaked in the wind. The chipped mug Clara favored still sat beside the tea tin. Tom's boots remained just as scuffed near the door, and Emma's drawing of her family still hung slightly crooked on the fridge. But something invisible had settled into the walls, something warmer, softer, a sense of belonging. It had been 2 weeks since the Meadow wedding. There had been no legal paperwork signed that day, no officiant's stamp or government seal. But for the three of them, that moment beneath the maple tree had been enough, more than enough. They had chosen one another, and in that choice, something sacred had been created. Clara stood at the stove, gently stirring a pot of tomato and basil soup. She wore one of Tom's old flannel shirts, far too big, sleeves rolled 3 times, and a faded apron Emma had decorated with permanent markers. There were stars, hearts, and a wobbly stick figure labeled Mom. She hadn't had the heart to change it. Emma sat at the table, scribbling on a pad of paper. She hummed to herself. Clara recognized the tune. It was the lullaby she'd played on the piano that night, now reshaped into something childlike and bright. Tom entered from the garage, the scent of sawdust clinging to his clothes. He walked past Clara, pressed a kiss to the side of her head like it was the most natural thing in the world. She paused just for a beat, not because it startled her, but because it didn't. She'd spent years measuring every affection, every touch, wondering what it cost, what it meant, what she had to give in return. But this kiss was an offering, not a transaction, and she accepted it with quiet joy. That afternoon they worked together in the backyard, preparing the garden for winter. Clara wore gloves 2 sizes too big and carried a small spade. Tom pulled out the last of the stubborn weeds while Emma jumped in leaf piles, laughing until her cheeks flushed red. They didn't talk much, but it wasn't a silence of avoidance. It was a silence of harmony. At one point, Clara reached for a tangle of dead vines and found Tom's hand already there. Their fingers brushed, lingered. He looked at her. "I keep thinking this'll wear off," he said quietly. She raised an eyebrow. "What? Me being helpful?" He smiled, shook his head. "You being here, feeling like it's real." Clara leaned in, kissed him on the cheek. "It's not going anywhere." Tom looked down at the soil. "It's strange. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad he left you at the altar." She laughed. "That makes 2 of us." They looked at each other for a moment, the weight of all they'd been through reflected in soft smiles and unspoken gratitude. That evening, they built a fire in the stove and curled up on the couch under the quilt Clara had mended with her own stitching. Emma sat between them, drowsy and warm, her head resting on Clara's shoulder. Clara played with a strand of Emma's hair. "I think," she said softly, "that this might be what love looks like." Tom turned toward her. "Not what you imagined. No castles, no roses flown in from France, no sweeping orchestras." He smiled. "Just chili and crayons." Clara looked at him, eyes shining, and quiet, and safety, and hands that don't let go. He reached for her hand, squeezed it. "Not letting go," he said. "Not again." Later that night, when Emma was asleep and the house had gone still, Clara stepped into the small room that had once been her guest room. It was empty now. Her things had long since moved into the master bedroom. But she stood there for a while, hands in her pockets, breathing in the quiet. She crossed the room, opened the drawer of the nightstand, and pulled out the old piece of linen. The vow. She unfolded it gently, running her fingers over the words. She didn't need to read them again. She knew them by heart. She placed it on the windowsill, beside a tiny vase of dried lavender. It no longer felt like a promise never fulfilled. It felt like a seed that had finally taken root. The wind had changed. It no longer carried the bite of winter or the silence of snow. Now it came gentle and full of birdsong, ruffling the soft green leaves unfurling on branches, tugging playfully at the ends of scarves and the hems of skirts. Spring had returned to Alder Ridge, and with it, the swing on the porch creaked once again, not in loneliness, but in rhythm with laughter. Emma was on it now, barefoot, arms outstretched, flying back and forth with the confidence only children and wildflowers possess. Her curls bounced with every movement, her voice soaring as she called out, "Higher! I want to touch the trees!" Clara watched from the porch steps, a mug of tea cradled between her hands. The warmth of the cup seeped into her palms, grounding her in the kind of morning that asked nothing, only offered itself. Behind her, the door creaked open, and Tom stepped out, tucking a dish towel over his shoulder. "She's going to take off one of these days," he said, nodding toward Emma. Clara smiled. "That's the plan, isn't it?" He sat beside her. "Yeah, but not just yet." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their daughter, as she was now truly theirs in every way that mattered, soar forward and return again and again, tethered by ropes and trust. "I still think about that day," Clara said eventually. "The church, the silence, the door closing behind him." Tom looked at her, gentle. "Regret?" She shook her head. "No, gratitude." She took a sip of tea. "If I'd been married that day, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering what love might feel like if it weren't so performative, so conditional." Tom said nothing. He didn't need to. His hand reached for hers, resting between them. "I think people spend a lot of time searching for magic," she continued, "chasing grand gestures. But what if it's not magic we need? What if it's something quieter?" He brushed his thumb across her knuckles. Like soup on a cold day, Clara laughed softly. Or a place to hang your coat, a name at the table. They both looked toward Emma, who had now leapt off the swing and was dancing barefoot through the grass, twirling like she could spin the whole world into bloom. She saved me, Clara said. In ways I don't think she'll understand for years, Tom nodded. She saved me too. The days that followed weren't perfect. There were burnt dinners, colds that passed through the house like tiny storms, and moments where the past knocked on the door of memory uninvited. But there was also music, and warmth, and stories read by firelight. There were birthdays made of pancakes and construction paper crowns. There were rainy days spent building forts from blankets and chairs, and quiet nights where Clara played the piano not to remember, but simply because she could. She began writing again, not vows, but letters. To herself, to the woman she had been, to the girl who once thought being left behind meant the end of her story. You weren't left, she wrote one morning. You were redirected, and what you found wasn't lesser. It was truer. One spring afternoon, Clara found herself alone on the porch swing, while Tom and Emma picked wildflowers nearby. She leaned back, eyes closed, letting the breeze carry her. It occurred to her then, how strange, how beautiful it all was. How life had broken her heart in half, just wide enough to let something real grow inside. She thought of all the things she'd once believed love had to be. And then she thought of Tom, holding a bowl of soup out to her with no conditions. She thought of Emma, handing her a crayon drawing and saying without hesitation, "You're in my family now." She thought of the way her name sounded in their home, like it had always belonged there. Clara opened her eyes, the trees above swaying in slow dance. No, she hadn't found a castle, but she had found something better, a home. And this time, she was not the bride left behind. She was the woman who had been found, by kindness, by patience, by a love that didn't ask her to perform, only to stay. And stay she did. Before you go, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I always enjoy seeing how far these quiet little stories can travel. And tell me, what part of The Bride Left Behind touched you the most? Was it Clara's quiet courage? Tom's steady kindness? Or maybe Emma's innocent, healing love? If this story spoke to you in any way, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next story that's waiting to find you. Thank you truly for spending this time with me. Stories only come alive when someone's heart is open to receive them. And today, that someone was you. Until next time, stay kind, stay soft, and remember, sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from the quietest endings.